Hello, hello. So I'm back with another episode of Mental Roots. My name is Nathan Day, and yeah, I decided to do this. This is a new podcast where I talk about basically different, specifically looking at the Black British male experience of mental health. And I guess the main reason I'm doing this is because of a short film that I'm working on at the moment in partnership with Rural Media, and they've got a scheme called New Creatives, and they got a commission that's from the BBC to back a short film I'm doing, which is basically telling a fictional story of a young black guy who's just trying to navigate through the different obstacles that he's facing, and him coming to terms with, what has led to his mental health breakdown and how he plans to solve it. So yeah, I'm just gonna talk with different people who have a few thoughts about Black British mental health, just to add to my research and to, I guess, add more substance to the film I'm doing. It's kind of a form of research, but hopefully it's informing you guys as well, especially those of you listening who might not be Black British. And so yeah, I'm here today with El Formosa. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct.
Awesome. El, do you want to just introduce yourself to the listeners and just say a bit about what you do, and and then we can get straight into it.
Okay. Hey, my name is Formosa. I am a content creator with a series on Grime at the moment called Mental Health and Grime. Excuse me. And it's basically exploring mental health in the grime scene with artists within the grime scene itself, and how artists develop music-wise and things like that in regards to mental health.
Awesome. And so, yeah, I think I'll start with sort of the first question. If I could just get it up quickly. But yeah, just basically tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, what sort of family you grew up in, because obviously environment is a huge factor in how we understand ourselves and the world around us. So just a little introduction into kind of where you grew up and how you grew up.
Okay, I grew up in London, in Northwest London, born and bred. I'm from a Jamaican background. Both sides of my family. I grew up in a Jamaican household with my nan, like as the head of the household, as usual in a Jamaican household. I lived there for quite a few years, probably about 10 years before I moved out with my mum, and then I lived with my mum. And then, yeah, that's it. I kind of always grew up in Northwest London. I haven't left. So
cool. Nice. And can you remember maybe the time you might have heard about the term mental health? Because I feel like even that term has a lot of mystery around it, and especially like what does that really mean? That sounds like a white man's problem,
Yeah.
So yeah, just take us through your first maybe experience or exposure to the concept of mental health and how your understanding of it has kind of developed through this.
It's going to
not
sound
just
weird,
through your
but
also the maybe any people you know in when you've grown up as well. Because one thing I found interesting about your mental health in Grime series is obviously Grime is quite male dominated, and you've spoken to a few people, and I'm a fan of Names Bliss, and I think it was another guy from who used to be a member of Roll Deep. Yeah. So I heard a little bit from both, and it was just interesting to see how, the way they were vulnerable about themselves. That's not something we see a lot in the media, and so I imagine maybe growing up, if you knew any black men or any black boys growing up, what was your relationship with them like? And I guess what was the difference between what you saw in real life and what, grime culture or just Black British culture was projecting? Kind of what were the differences and stuff?
okay.
So, yeah, that was two different questions.
Yeah, it's two questions.
Sorry about that. Yeah, answer the first one.
The first one. I think hearing the term mental health, it sounds weird, but I knew what kind of depression was growing up. But hearing the term mental health, I was an adult before I heard that. And that could have been probably maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, that's when I started to suffer from ill mental health. Just to clarify, I say everyone has mental health, but when you are unwell, it's ill mental health or poor mental health. And probably about 5 or 6 years ago is when I heard the term mental health, particularly, and started to kind of, when I did my research about what I was going through with anxiety, seeing the term mental health come up, kind of, I guess, how the world's becoming these days, there were a lot of problems and more people starting to suffer from mental health. So now it's become quite a colloquial term. And I think kind of most people now will have used it or know someone with mental health or whatever. So,
and then, the second question.
Second question. I grew up on grime music. So I was always in a male dominated kind of era from kind of like 13. I had loads of friends who were DJs, loads of friends who were MCs, they were predominantly men. I think I don't remember being a female MC. So going out to these kind of like raves and events and stuff, I'd probably have like one girlfriend with me and there'll be just males all over the place. And it's kind of, they went through things, like, obviously with pirate radio and setting things up and having beef with people, you know, like road beef there. You never ever saw any kind of, I don't know how to put it. You never ever saw down. Vulnerability, that's it. You never ever saw vulnerability. You know, if they had beef with someone, it was just a thing like, how am I going to deal with it? How am I going to deal with it? You know, that person could have gone home and cried, but we would never know. We would never see that. It's kind of a logical, matter-of-fact way to deal with it. And that's the kind of advice that they got as well. They never got any kind of sympathy, like in the form of, you know, a comfort type of thing. It was kind of, oh, you've got to do this, fam, you've got to do that. Like, you know. And definitely as around a group of guys, you would never see that in a group. I never saw it on one-to-one, and it would definitely never happen in a group. You would definitely not show your vulnerability in front of a group of like 10 MCs at a radio station. Just wouldn't happen.
Were there any moments still when you were growing up where, again, because you said you had some friends, were there moments where you saw their vulnerability and, you know, saw, especially your male friends, seeing that? I mean, I guess obviously a lot of people within grime culture know that the whole basis of it is you are trying to just showcase yourself as a rapper. You're trying to showcase yourself as the alpha male, you know, and I guess people already know it's not real life to an extent, but sometimes have you felt in your experience, sometimes the lines were a little bit blurred and maybe, because what I wonder is, like, how deep are we misled by grime culture in some ways? You know, we know that performativity is a huge part of it, but sometimes when a rapper says something about, you know, his lifestyle and his music, have the lines been blurred? Have people ended up actually taking things to heart? Or, you know, how from your experience, how easy has it been for people to believe some of the, I guess, the fantasies portrayed in grime music? You know, like how has, that's quite a deep question, but like how, well, at a certain point for you, did you ended up starting to believe certain things in music, or maybe looking back, you think maybe I was a little bit too influenced by that song or this rapper or whatnot? Just wondering if that's something that you relate to.
Yeah, I feel like whatever they were spitting, people believed. And I think the only way you could know whether it was true is if you met that person or you knew a friend of a friend. There's always like rumours, you know, did you hear this guy did this, or what he says in the tune is like he actually did that to someone. Like, you heard rumours and you heard stories, but there were times when I've heard people spit about certain things and I've met them and I'm like, you are nothing like the lyrics that I've just heard. Nothing at all. There's I think most of it, like, it did cross over into real life, and I wouldn't even call it a crossover. I'd call it a lifestyle. The lyrics that most of them were spitting were life. Like, grime was life. It was on road, do music. It just went hand in hand with the same thing. it just went hand in hand with each other is what I mean. And kind of the lyrics they were spitting about having beef with someone, you know, they did have beef with this person. How they dealt with it might have been different compared to their lyrics, but they did
Yeah,
have
yeah,
beef with that person. And I think you asked, did I see any vulnerability? And it kind of,
yeah.
you get flashes of vulnerability. Maybe it's because
Mm,
I'm female. So, like I said, I had quite a lot of close male friends who were like DJs and stuff. And
mm,
kind of, if they, you know, I was chilling with them on a one-on-one and they decided to talk about whatever they was going through,
mm,
it wouldn't be a total, like, you know, transparent breakdown, but you did see, you
yeah.
know, the frustration and the anger and like a little bit of sadness and just the stress. Stress was a big one. Yeah.
Mm. And just from your experience growing up, what were the kind of the bigger, the biggest sort of things that you'd hear these guys complain about? You know, was it to do with the injustice they felt, or being stopped and searched, or you know, what sort of recurring things did you get from these, you know, I guess semi-vulnerable conversations that you've had with
Um,
certain guys growing up?
Probably beef was a big one.
Mm.
Um, Over
But
different
beef
things,
with other, like beef
other
with other
MCs,
black
other
guys, yeah.
guys, yeah,
Mm,
other guys in the area.
mm,
Probably things like over money, um,
mm,
over drugs, um, beef with family as well, like falling out with your
mm,
family because music is not always what your family want you to do. That was a big one, and
mm,
obviously going out to pirate radio and doing sets and shows at all different times and coming in and not having a job as we got older. That was a big one for parents, for people to fall out with their parents about. Um, and yeah, sometimes it would even be radio beef, like falling out with the radio manager because you didn't pay your subs or whatever.
yeah.
Um, or turning up at radio shows and it all kicking off because someone that you didn't like from a different manner turned up at the same time, and it would just all
Mm.
go nuts, like things like that. But yeah.
Cool. So even what you just mentioned there is pretty deep, you know, and we could obviously delve into each, I guess, causing factor. Um, I just wanted just to get your perspective on like the roots of all these issues, you know, this whole thing about family issues, and even, you know, when there's, you mentioned beef, and then automatically some people will say, yeah, see, black on black crime is a real thing, blah blah blah. But obviously it's much deeper than that. Black guys do not kill other black guys because they're black. It's because, you know, obviously we are, as black men, there's a lot of environmental and social difficulties we're dealing with, and if in it just turns out that, you know, we live in close proximity to each other. So, you know, when any human being is frustrated, what do? They take it out on the person closest to them. So that's my perspective on it. Like, what's your perspective on the different causes that you've mentioned? That some people might say, yeah, see, that's an example of black be black people being this or that. Like, how would you counter those sort of arguments and say, actually, there's more to it than that? You know, um, just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Well, there were white people in the scene. That's one thing.
Yeah,
There were white people in the scene as well. You did have beef with them.
yeah,
Also, it's like I just want to say, you don't go, like you said, you don't go and beef another guy because he's black when you're black. That's
yeah,
not how it is. It's, you know, issues related to probably generational things, tradition, you know, like family values and that, you know, obviously Caribbean people, they're not known
mm,
for expressing their feelings. You don't talk about things, so you bottle things up. And times when you bottle
mm,
things up and they can explode in other areas of your life. So, you know, you've
true,
had
yeah,
an argument with your mum at home or your grandma who you're living with because your mum kicked you out. And then you go into radio and someone, I don't know, steps on your foot or gets on your nerves and you
mm,
start an argument with them and it turns into a madness because everyone's just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Something as simple as that.
mm,
Um, and yeah, no way could it be related to our race. Obviously,
mm,
like we're got a lot to deal with as black people. Like you said, stop and search. As I got older, probably like 15, 16, I would see that happen a lot.
mm,
17, my black friends getting stopped and searched. I've known instances where they're walking with a white person and the white person is told to keep walking and the black person will get stopped and searched. Those kind of things that you can't kind of fight against really build resentment inside you. And
mm,
resentment that's built inside you that can't go anywhere will automatically come out in places you don't want it to. So those are things that cause a frustration between people. And that's
mm,
when you start arguing over, money and women and
yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Mm, cool. And yeah, I guess I'll just be transparent because I've been fortunate enough to have quite a what's it called? A sheltered upbringing. I grew up in a Christian family, and I was born in Leicester, briefly lived in Ghana, and then spent the early part of my childhood just living in like Clapham Park, so kind of near Brixton.
Mhm.
But I never witnessed firsthand, my friends on the road. Because obviously at that age, you're not, you're not, aware of that stuff anyway. But um, I guess kind of what the large part of my perspective of um, the marginalization or the extreme cases of marginalization that Black people experience in Britain, a lot of my perspective of it has been through grime music and through the media than my
Mhm.
own experiences. And I think even probably a lot of guys living in the ends might still have that, might still be able to relate to that, where then just because you live in a certain area or you have certain friends doesn't mean you're exposed that you've actually been part of gang culture or you've actually witnessed certain things. And that's, I think, something that a lot of people don't understand. Like, just because I'm Black British doesn't mean I've been to a grime set or I know, like, I'm privy to all the things that I guess a lot of popular Black British spokespeople are aware of. And
Mhm.
so I'm also trying to be aware of my own inconsistencies of viewing Black British culture as well, because it's there's so many levels to it, and um, I'm learning just as much as anyone else through this podcast. So I think that being self-aware and being aware that like two Black people could be living in the same area, but their experiences might be very different.
Yeah.
um, I don't, have you kind of witnessed that growing up, and maybe you've had certain friends who, or specifically male friends who, um, were exposed to the same things, but because of one certain aspect that was different in their lives, one of them turned out different from the other. I don't know if there's any circumstances you've seen in regards to that.
Yeah, I can think of that. Even differences between myself and
Mm,
males growing up in the same area, and you know, one person could have a different aspect of grime music. They grow
mm,
up listening to it, going to the raves, but going with a different set of friends and kind of not mixing
mm,
with people and then leaving and going home. But at the same
mm.
rave, something bad could happen and it could be one of
Yeah.
my friends, but my friends could get caught up in it. So that's me and my
Mm,
first-hand account. But they went to a rave, had a good time, and they went home. Something as simple as
mm,
that. And just because you live in, a predominantly black area where um, I would say where grime culture can be quite dense does not mean that you will have the same experience as someone else. It all depends
mm,
on like people that you roll with
mm,
and what you do outside of that kind of thing.
mm. Cool. So I guess in summary, let's maybe look at, because you also work for an organization as well. I've forgotten the name, um, but I think you sent me a link to the website.
Is it
Do you want to?
move?
Sorry, say
Yeah,
that again.
Mental Movement magazine.
Yeah. So can you kind of explain how you got into that, and through through working with the magazine, have you um, been able to have a clearer idea of kind of the biggest challenges there are to Black British communities in regards to actually effectively dealing with mental health? Number one, actually understanding what it is and understanding that the everyday things we go through, whether it's, having to work double shifts because, that's just how it is for us, or hearing that our friend got stabbed or whatnot, or being stopped and searched, all these little things that might be easy for us to just brush past because we're so used to it, eventually it starts to take a toll on just your mental well-being. So through your work with Mental Health Magazine, what sort of things have you discovered in regards to how we as Black British people deal with and should deal with mental health?
I found out things like we are less likely to kind of receive medical help in time because we're perceived as strong people. That goes for mental and physical health. Waiting lists for mental health services are quite long, and when services are offered to Black British people, they have more of a, should I say, difficult time convincing their mental health professional that they are in need of dire help. Again, for the same kind of "you look strong, you must be strong" type of thing.
Yeah.
Black people are less likely to seek therapy and counselling. Excuse me. And
Yeah.
again, I think that's a cultural thing and kind of
Yeah.
generational thing. Yeah.
Mm.
Um,
And we can delve
yeah.
into that a bit more if you want, because I feel like that's an
Yeah.
interesting thing. You know, we don't even feel that the authorities can handle our pain, that they can understand it. So I think that in itself carries a lot of weight to it. So
Mhm.
if you had more to say on that, then I welcome you to
Yeah. I
say,
think
yeah.
that I'm trying to think how I would explain it to someone who kind of has no understanding of it. And it would be that Caribbean families and African families have a kind of keep calm, carry on attitude. And it literally is you don't speak about your feelings. You kind of deal with what comes and you get on with it. And your face is just a poker face. You will never know that, your grandma is suffering because she just gets up, she gets on with it, she does what needs to be done. And everything is just as it was. And she could be, screaming out inside, but you'd never notice. And that is a thing that gets carried on through generations. My family is the same. We grew up as a kind of, you just get on with it. Something may be tough, but you've got to do it because, I don't know, you've got kids or, you've got to get to work. And you don't want to be seen to be faltering. You don't want to be seen to be like you can't handle something or like you're causing a problem because there's this kind of stigma that if you don't do something that you're making something an issue and you're the issue, and then that goes into kind of a race thing as well. Like you're not playing ball. If that white person can do it and come into work, why can't you do it? Why are you making something an issue for? So you just get on with it and you suffer, so to speak. And if that's the only attitude and what you pass on to your family, it takes one person to kind of step out of that and break it. And if that doesn't happen, you just carry on the way that you've been brought up.
So in that context, for you, what helped you? Obviously, you're still on a journey of, I guess, no one's mental health is perfect. I think that's also worth establishing. We need to be realistic as to what we're aiming for, because to be human means you will be vulnerable. You will always have weaknesses, right? And so there's always ways of improving your mental health. Even the most wealthy person in the world has mental health issues. The causes may be different, but everyone struggles with some form of mental health because we go through life. We have all sorts of messages that we're absorbing. We have all sorts of experiences that test our integrity and test our character. And so I think this is, it's important to look at the broader picture and think, we're not saying that if you're getting help for your mental health, that means we're expecting you to have happy days all the time, because that's not what it is. But I guess, obviously now it seems you're open to talk about it. What helped you kind of break out of, what you described as this tradition in, your Jamaican family to, just keep pushing, keep going on? What made you, or what series of events led to you just learning to be vulnerable about this and just address your issues for what they were, if that makes sense?
Quite simply, I just broke down. I just broke. I didn't have a
Mm,
choice. It got to a point where there was a problem, and I was high functioning with that problem. And then one day something just snapped and I couldn't do anything. I was literally
mm,
housebound, and it had to be, okay, I have to tell someone now.
mm.
I have to do
Was
something
there
about it.
any like particular event that triggered it, or just yeah? If I don't want to go too deep if you don't want to, but
No, that's
um,
fine.
oh, cool. Yeah, just try and give us like all the details just to establish, because I really want to make this real, and I want to the listeners to try and get into your shoes, if that makes sense, as much as possible. So,
That's
yeah,
fine.
just
Absolutely
take it
fine.
away. Take it away.
So what happened is I had a operation that didn't go so well.
Mm,
And when I woke up from the operation, I lost some sight in my eye, and it was meant to be like a routine operation. So I woke up and something unexpected had happened to me, and I just kind of turned my world upside down to the point where I just couldn't function um, in my new normal, I guess. Um, and I was expected to, go back to work and carry on with it, but physically I was unwell, and then mentally just totally just not there at all. Trying to carry on and not ignore it, but kind of brush over it and pretend everything was going to be okay actually made it worse.
mm,
Um, and I started to suffer with really bad anxiety. Like leaving the house was a difficult thing.
mm,
And this is not a word I'd heard before. I didn't know what it was. So experiencing it, I was like having to read up on the internet,
mm,
excuse me, asking people, had to visit my doctor, and say, what is going on here? What is this? And for them to tell me what it is. Um, and think anxiety. Have I heard that word before? I think I'd heard it probably like twice in my life, but it's something that if you've never had it before, it means nothing to you. It will just go over your head. But when
mm,
you start to live with it, you realize how much like power the word actually holds for you.
mm,
Um, and it involved me kind of having to talk to people, having to speak to my mum, having to speak to my auntie, having to speak to my
mm.
dad and tell them, you know,
Yeah.
I'm suffering with something and it's
Mm,
called anxiety.
mm,
I don't know what it is, but this is how it makes me feel, and I need some help now. I'm
mm,
broken. I do need someone to
mm.
get me out of this. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did your family receive it? You
Um,
know, not that any family is perfect. You know, it's a process, but
no.
just yeah.
My parents don't understand it. They don't.
Mm,
They I think in the beginning they thought that maybe I could have been making it a little bit worse than it was, or they didn't understand from me speaking about it
mm,
how bad it was. But
mm,
them seeing it, seeing me break down and panic,
mm,
um, they kind of realized that it was a real thing for me. It was very, very
mm,
real, but they don't understand it at all. They just don't get it.
mm.
And that's not for want of trying. They have tried to
Yeah, yeah.
understand. In the beginning, they just didn't understand. And then they started to, I always say that if you don't understand it, that's absolutely fine. I wouldn't want you to, because you won't understand it unless you've had it, but you have to respect it. So
Yeah, yeah.
uh, they
Yeah, I
do
guess
respect.
that's yeah, I guess that's all we really need is like cool if you don't totally get it, but at
Yeah.
least respect that this is something that you haven't experienced. So, you know,
Yeah.
my experience is still real. You know, it's my opinions are still valid because
Yeah.
you haven't been exposed to it as much as I have. So, I mean, as long as like the people closest to you get that, then I think
Hmm.
that's a good solid start because again, I'm not trying to perpetuate negative stereotypes, but and again, it's not entirely our fault as such. You know, the system there are systems in place that perpetuate this, but the lack of father figures in many Black British homes, um, I think that's also a big part because obviously, um, again, another thing we can talk about is have you the anxiety that you had? Have you seen any of your black male friends have experienced something similar? Um, and if so, or even if not, like have any of your friends opened up about them? They might have not used the term mental health, but looking back, you can. you think actually I can see that might have been a mental health problem that my friend was
Yeah.
having. So looking back, do you think what who are the first people they opened up to? Because I think that's quite interesting. As
Hmm.
young black people, who are the first people we open up to? Is it our parents or is it our close friends? Exactly, like is it our close friends or another interesting thing to look at is the culture of, I guess, religion in many black families as well,
Hmm.
and the role that has to play. So that's another whole kettle of fish in terms of how the black
Yeah.
church is dealing with mental health.
Hmm.
But yeah, just what have you seen your friends do in terms of maybe one of the first things they do to open up about their
It
issues?
talking to friends first, kind of
Mm,
talking when you're black, talking to your parents about something is the last resort. You only do
yeah,
that unless
I relate. I relate. I relate.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they know that as well. So when you speak to your family about something, they know
They
that
know it's
it's
serious. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
know that you've exhausted every other avenue before, like having to tell them. So yeah, friends first, sounding it out with friends, seeing how they feel, have they been through it. Um, I think I've only known one person who's gone through it, but I never physically saw it. I never
Fair
saw
enough.
it in front of me. She just spoke to me about it. But when I was going through it, it was like, what is this? I feel like I'm the first person in the world to go through it. Like I've
Mm,
never had this before. So yeah, speaking to friends first, and then eventually speaking to my parents, and then my mum kind of admitting that she was quite anxious as a child.
mm,
Um, and yeah, I just never noticed. Like I said, if you don't know anything about it, you kind of just gloss over it. And that sounds really bad, but um, yeah, it's just how we are as humans. If someone tells you they have something and you don't have it, you can't relate and you just don't register it. But when you do go through it, it becomes relevant. And then you start to see different signs of things.
mm. Um, oh, I was gonna ask another question. It slipped out of my mind now, but I've got so many questions swimming around and the order's getting jumbled up. But yeah, it might come back to me later. But yeah, so in regards to the mental health magazine,
Mhm.
can you kind of describe, first of all, how long have you been working with them and what's your role?
Uh,
Um, and
editorial.
yeah, just
I'm
kind
a,
of get into the projects you've done and any, have you seen like tangible results in how it's affecting other young black people, specifically men, if that applies. From the work you're doing, have you been able to see any sort of results or anyone reach out to you and say, "Oh wow, this is really helping me" or whatnot, through any of the content creation or organization work that you've done?
so kind of, I'm editorial assistant. So things come into our
Mm,
inbox and we kind of go through submissions because people can write in, um,
mm,
email into us and give us their own version of their mental health story or something that has helped them. And then we put that onto the website. So kind of, we don't get many mails doing it though. And if we do get mails are more practical. So it would be like, oh, I've
mm,
tried yoga for 90 days and I've documented
mm,
it. So this is something that might help. And then with women, we get kind of normal stories and, what they've been through and things like that. The whole point of the website is meant to be like a resource. So they've got links to helplines, they've got stories that you may be able to relate to. They try to find help for people in different kind of areas where they live. Obviously, mental health services are different wherever you are. Um, and they try to do that worldwide, try to help people out who are either waiting for therapy on the list or don't know how to access it.
mm,
So yeah, I wouldn't say we see a lot of Black British people
mm,
with submissions or kind of interacting with the site, to be honest.
mm. And um, have you kind of heard maybe any testimonials from people or just any indication of what any work you've been part of has how that has impacted any Black British person, just
With
out of
regards to the
interest?
magazine or what I've been doing myself.
Just yeah, both. Um, just yeah, anything that you've been doing.
Yeah.
Um,
On my Instagram, I'm quite open about my mental health.
mm,
I kind of, to me, it's a part of life. So I don't make a special kind of section for it. If it happens and it comes up, people know about it. If I'm having a bad day, I'm not ashamed to put it up. And I have had a few people say, your Instagram is probably one of the most normal we've seen compared to highlight reels and kind of what people want to put up there. And you seem like you kind of a real person, I guess. Mental health and grime, I've had quite good feedback on that, with people saying that, it's interesting to hear people talk about their anxieties and their issues, especially looking at performers that they wouldn't think had any problems, so to speak. And mental movement's quite a positive place with all the information they've got in there. And we do get quite positive feedback about people, about things that they found to help them, and kind of pointing them in the right direction therapy-wise. And they have a therapy a therapy service attached to the website as well, so people can access therapy that way.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Cool. And yeah, let's briefly touch on sort of the mental health in grime series. So obviously your love for grime growing up is what influenced it. And I imagine, obviously you haven't finished yet. Would you say you're halfway through the series, or you don't know when it's going to end? You're just keeping it moving?
I'm on this week is episode 8. I think there'll be a few more, but I think I want to end on a high, so I'm not going to drag it out for too long. Yeah.
Fair enough. And are there any common things that have been coming up through the interviews in terms of, obviously most of the people you've been speaking to are grime artists, if I'm wrong, correct me, but yeah, just like what's their perspective been on what grime does for them in terms of helping them as people? How is there some sort of therapeutic effect that it has on them, or is it, in regards to how grime is affecting their own mental health? What recurring sort of message are you getting, if there is any?
Predominantly that music is a therapy, and the creation of music, and putting it out there, recording your lyrics and having something to be proud of. That kind of process for artists is a big thing. For DJs, it would be, gaining a show on somewhere quite popular, or creating a mix for something quite high profile. On the flip side, we get a lot of there's no talking in the grime scene, so everyone is kind of knowing what's going on but not really saying anything. I've also got a lot of kind of sometimes meeting people, like I said, after you've heard their lyrics is not the same thing. What they portray on tune, not the real person. The real person is obviously sometimes quite the opposite. They could be quite aggy and quite loud and brash in their music, and then you meet them and they're kind of like really quiet and really meek and not what you thought they were. I think those things, and people have been agreeing that we need to talk more in the scene, and that it's okay to kind of put some truthful, heartfelt lyrics over grime music without talking about being a bad man all the time.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and that's why I like artists like Names Bliss, and I don't know if you've heard of Melvillous as well. And yeah, there's quite a few other MCs that I like, that I might put you on, who, they do, they do sort of clean grime music. Really, it's because of their Christian faith, and they just want to be real about their faith and their music. But also, more than that, it's just it's a breath of fresh air. We want positivity in grime music. You can still light up a set with positive messages and be like, yo, let's own our own businesses. Let's other more constructive ways of portraying Black excellence. So in addition to that, are there any sort of practical things that you want to see more in Black British communities in terms of in terms of us controlling the narrative of our own mental health? Because it seems like for many Black British people, it's like either I keep this to myself or I open up to the NHS or some other service that doesn't understand me as a Black person. So would you say that there's a third option, that we can actually own our narrative? We have the power to own, the way we deal with mental health. the everyday conversations we have are probably even more important than depending on institutions or trying to get a certain counselor or whatnot.
Mhm.
I think that's a huge part of moving forward. But what about you? What other things would you like to see more in terms of us making progress?
I'd like to see more Black therapists. Um,
Mm,
Mental Movement have a organisation called House of Self, where they have
mm,
more people from Black backgrounds who are therapists. Also, amongst the Black Lives Matter protests the other week, there were things coming out of that. I can't remember the website, but there was a website where Black therapists were offering free therapy for Black people,
mm.
um, which I thought was quite good.
Yeah,
Again,
because
I
that's
think,
another thing as well. It's the cost of therapy,
yeah,
especially if you want a private counselor.
yeah,
The prices are ridiculous, and so that's another thing. You know, there's a class issue there. There's a money
yeah,
issue there. So, yeah, like what you said, hearing, you know, free counseling sessions or reduced costs, I think that would really help. And I can only see that really coming into effect if we see more qualified um, Black therapists who understand what it's like to come from a family
yeah.
where you have to work twice as hard as your peers. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's a great thing you highlighted. Anything else?
I think how, just to add to that, I think how lawyers do legal aid or pro bono work in America, they call it. I think therapists should be able to do something like that. Um, that would be great for the same thing because I think, mental health is very, very important. Again, I think it's our generation kind of breaking that um, cultural pattern and saying, listen, I've got something to talk about and kind of keeping on talking about it. So, generations after us will not have the problems that we've had before where we're unable to speak
Mm,
to each other. And it does help. It really does help. I can vouch for that kind of talking about it to your parents. And, it doesn't go away if just because you stop talking about it. The more you talk about it, the better. That's how you get it to, get it to a manageable place when you're able to talk about it with your family. That helps. Um,
mm.
I think kind of role models as well. That's another thing I wanted to achieve with mental health and grime. Younger, artists, up and coming artists, or younger people that look up to those grime artists can see them speaking out about
Yeah,
things, having positive lyrics in their tunes, speaking about their health and where it comes from. The more you normalize it, the less of a problem it becomes. And if you're able to grow
yeah,
up in a household where you're able to talk to people, or if not, you're able to see someone that you admire talking about things that are, normalizing mental health and a conversation like sexual health, which should be normal in a household, or physical health. That again breaks so much stigma, and that is a big help in itself. Yeah.
and shall we just take this moment to maybe shout out a few artists that you've seen where it's like, okay, I like what this grime artist is doing here, because I think we do need to give credit where credit is due, and all the artists that we're seeing who are already speaking up about these things in different
Hmm.
ways. Let's actually use this platform and bring attention to them so that hopefully the listeners can look into that. So yeah, just from your experience, any grime artists that you've seen um, opening up about mental health, and sometimes it's not received well, sometimes it is, but kind of just share what you've seen in the grime scene.
My number one, my number one would be Manga. He's just released an album called, or say just released this year, an album called Make It Alive, and it was amazing. It was basically like a diary of how he's feeling, how he's come to, be as a person and what he's learned. Um, Obviously, we don't have to make lyrics shouting like, mental health this, mental health that, but just to talk about how you're feeling and normalize like low feelings, high feelings, whatever. His music has always been um, kind of thought based as opposed to, I own this, I own that, I'm this kind of MC. So he's always been one coming up that's been in a kind of league of his own. So I really, really recommend people listen to his music, and it's not your typical grime, but it's grime. Get what I mean? Name.
Do you think nowadays it's much more common for certain grime artists to be just vulnerable in their music, as opposed to when growing up? Because obviously, I'll be honest, I wouldn't call myself the number one grime fan. I listen to grime here and there. I listen to kind of the big names, but I'm not deep in it to know all the
Okay.
sort of well-known, all the upcoming artists, or you know. Um, so I guess the earlier days of grime, I was oblivious to that. I was more focused on US hip hop, but like in the recent years, I've been listening a bit more to sort of the Kanos and the Gets, and especially their latest albums, where for example, you've got Gets talking about his faith. You get him talking about his friends. You get him talking about um, also his daughter as well, and addressing in the song I think Black Rose with Koji Radical, and he talks about the toxic masculinity and how we as black men have been mistreating our women. I'm not sure if that's always been in grime, and now I'm just being aware of it, or if it's actually something that's become more prevalent in recent years of grime music. I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I think it's a more recent thing. I think when I was growing up, I wasn't ready to hear lyrics like that. I just wanted to hear the hype lyrics, the bad man lyrics or whatever. That was what grime was about. But I think as guys have got older and they've branched out of their collectives and stuff and they've gained experience, then they're able to talk more on those things. And be real in their music. So it's simple as that. Be real in their music on them, and it's okay to do that, especially as how things have changed as well. And it's really, really refreshing to hear those things. And most of their stories will either be what they're currently going through or things they have gone through back to when grime was something different. So it's interesting to hear it from that perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also, I guess, what we call the golden era of grime. I know that's debated to an extent, but like, yeah, again, sort of the older generation of rappers are now, a lot of them are fathers now. A lot of them obviously are, the road lifestyle is far behind them, and they've got a bit of a retrospective kind of hindsight to look
Yeah.
back and look at the bigger
Life
picture. And
experience.
yeah, so I think that's what we're seeing now, and we're seeing that generation of rappers being more honest due to just where they are in life. And um, yeah, and I think there's a lot of crossover with just hip hop culture in general, and what we're seeing in this drug culture, and I guess depression has become a trending thing now in many rappers. Um, there's two sides to it. There's a side where before, you had your gangster rap where it's like alpha male, nothing's wrong with me. And then you've
Mhm.
got the extreme end of it now with scenes such as emo rap, where it's like we're being so vulnerable, but it's like to the point of making it seem like we're helpless and drugs are just the way through it.
Mhm.
So I think there's toxicity in both sides, if that makes sense, and
Yeah.
it's just learning to strike that balance as well. And that's why I think it's worth learning from the older generation, as younger generation artists who are like, yeah, we're just trying to be real. Yeah, I'm going through depression, and it seems like a trending thing, but actually, we can still learn a little from, I guess, the OGs in terms of, there are ways to get through life without medicating, and it's kind of taking the best of both worlds and coming to a healthy balance. So
Yeah.
that's personally what I'd want to see in rap culture, is that
Okay.
we're us as males, we're not invincible, but we're not nobodies either. There
Yeah.
are healthy ways we can overcome our pain without the material things,
Mhm.
or acting as someone we're not. So that's what I'd like to see more. Um, what
I
I
think I think males have, I think males have gone through depression, but they didn't realize what it was. If you think about growing up, what you've got to deal with, they had to deal with kind of obviously, I'm talking about grime culture again. If they were on the roads, being on the roads, arguments with their parents, and then um, radio beef or what have you. If they were getting up to illegal activities, if they had beef on the roads, looking over their shoulder all the time, trying to find money for their families, all being stopped and searched by police, all those things built up, and they kind of obviously they affect you. You'd be a robot if you were unaffected, but the kind of moods and phases they were in were so normal because that's just what you had to deal with. But I
Yeah.
think it's only as you've got older you can realize that most men that age and from that era that have to deal with that are or were actually depressed.
Mm. And true. And I'd say lastly, just to finish up, adding on to what we'd want to see moving on. Do
Mhm.
you have any ideas of any sort of physical spaces where you might have seen maybe a grime artist open up about um, a vulnerability or whatnot that could help the conversation of mental health? Have you seen that live in any sets or any I guess any gigs um, or even in more everyday life sort of scenario, when in the salon or any other sort of environment where there are a lot of other black people? Have you started seeing conversations, more sort of healthy, vulnerable conversations happening? Or if not, what sort of spaces, physical spaces, would you want to see stuff like this happening more?
Um, I've got two to that answer. The first one I
Mm,
remember is seeing a set with an MC from West London called K9. And
mm,
he was on a set with I think about four different MCs and spitting their lyrics. And a grime tune comes on and he comes on and he starts
mm,
spitting real deepness about friends that he'd lost.
mm,
I think about three friends he'd lost all in a short space of time. And he's talking about how it affected him, how he was depressed, and what happened to his friends. It was just so heartfelt. It actually got me really emotional, and you could
wow.
see the pain that he was spitting. And after he'd finished his lyrics, he was spitting for a good 4 minutes. After he'd finished,
Mm,
everyone around him kind of like congratulated him, kind of patted him on the back, and
mm,
they were clapping for him, spudded him, kind of put their arm around him, and for men to do that in a real appreciation from what they'd heard and listened to, the respect that they had for him for those bars, like
mm,
you could see it. It was really like a big thing, a really big thing. I've actually got
mm.
him on my show on Friday, so I'm really interested to talk to him about that.
Oh, cool.
Um,
I better get in tune for that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. As
Better
opposed
tune
to
in.
what we can do, I think it starts with the youth. I just feel like
Mm,
I work with young people, so I'm always trying to find ways to, make things better for them and make the world a better place for them. And I just think that those kinds of conversations have to start in school the same way they do sex education. They should have mental health lessons.
definitely.
And
Yeah.
again, it goes to normalizing the conversation and realizing that young people in a world like this do actually go through a lot, and we need to acknowledge that because
Yeah.
um, it's just so important. It's as important as physical health. And to some
Yeah.
extent, physical health is easier to fix than mental health. And
True.
I believe that they should grow up with a good kind of support, not only support network, but good knowledge of mental health.
Yeah.
Really important. I'm really passionate about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think more often than not, unfortunately, we see um, people learn about mental health too late, and by the time they learn about it and they understand the roots of their pain, a
Yeah.
lot of damage has already been done
Yeah.
in regards to their family, their jobs, what they've gotten
Hmm.
themselves into to cope with their pain. So I
Yeah.
definitely agree with you. You know, the earlier we start this conversation, the better. So I think
100%.
schools need to do a better job at talking about these things and um, also being sensitive to how our ethnic experiences influence our
Definitely.
mental health as well. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, one thing I forgot to ask you was when you found out you had your anxiety,
Hmm.
looking back, were there any sort of unique experiences as a black woman in Britain that might have contributed to that as well? And I'm not trying to perpetuate the narrative that every black person's case of mental health breakdown is to do with their ethnicity, but I just want to, I'm just trying to get a clearer picture of how much that influences, many black people's mental health issues. So I was just
Hmm.
wondering, just in your own experience, if that's been any contributing factor or maybe not.
Yeah. Definitely growing up in a household that didn't talk was a big
Mm,
factor. Um, to some extent, growing up in a single parent family and
mm,
being different to my mum, I guess. People see me as different. My mum is brown skin like you,
oh, okay.
and I got a lot of stick for being different to her when I
Mm,
was younger. Um, I'm going to be blunt, having to prove my blackness to people who thought I was of mixed descent, because I was from a one-parent family. Yeah, things like that really knocked my confidence. And when you start to have therapy and go through the roots of your anxiety, because there's always a trigger, but the trigger is not always the cause. These are root cause. And when you go back to the root cause, these are the things that kind of affected me growing up. So I guess in that respect, it was kind of inevitable. The trigger was the operation, but it just brought all of these things out that I've been holding inside, that I was unable to deal with, bring out and deal with. Yeah.
That's cool. So I think we'll end it there. I think we've mentioned quite a lot. And yeah, thank you for your time, Elle. And
You're welcome.
if you want to send any last message to the listeners, especially young Black people, are there any sort of closing words of thought that you want to give, and where people can find you and your work and stuff like that? Take it away.
Yeah, I just want, I say to anyone, if you ever have any issue, no matter what it is, talk about it, whether it's to a family member, a friend. If you see someone mention something on the internet that resonates with you, and you want to know more about it, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to start the conversation. Mental Health and Grime is still on at the moment. It's every Friday at 3:30 p.m. on my Instagram. My Instagram is at EL Formosa, FORMOSA, with an X at the end. And yeah, if anyone ever has any questions about mental health or anything there, feel free to DM me. I'm more than happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to end it there. Everyone, thank you for listening. Again, if this podcast is impacting you in any way, shape or form, please let me know. DM me as well. More episodes to come. Names Bliss is dropping a new tune this Friday as well. He's calling it Emotional Grime, so I'm looking forward to that. And I will be speaking to him next Monday as well, as of the time I'm recording this. So yeah, thanks for listening and peace.